Hey, this Judge and Waits. Happy Friday to you guys. How in the world are you doing? What do you got planned for the weekend? Anything exciting? I think I'm going to be splitting wood, so that's my exciting time for this weekend. Let me know in the comments section, and maybe I can live vicariously through you. Is that the right word? Vicariously? I don't know. Sounds right, but doesn't sound right at the same time. But hey, enough about that. Wanted to do a response to my Monday video where I talked about suffering. And if you haven't watched that video, please go back and watch that. It'll probably explain a lot. But in that video, I kind of posed the question to you guys and asked you what you thought about this. You know, hey, if there is an all-knowing, all-powerful, and a loving God out there, why does he allow suffering, especially with all the crazy things that are going on in the world today? And I kind of listed 3 things that were kind of really hitting me hard this past week. But you guys came back with some great responses, and I kind of want to go over some of those responses and give you my take on this subject, because this is a subject that a lot of non-Christians are probably going to ask you if you are a Christian, and you know, they're going to want to know why you believe what you believe and everything like that. So just want to kind of touch on some things. You guys did, like I said, a great job responding. I know Clee and Soldier talked about God's sovereignty, and I don't really want to get into that particular topic. Ocho, Dagon, Aaron, Chronic, Leslie, all of you guys pointed out about the free will that God gives us, and I think that's a big source of the suffering in the world today. You know, I was reading an article about this guy, Jason Worth. I think he's a baseball player for, I don't know, Nationals maybe, but he got caught back in July doing 105 miles an hour in a 55, and I was like, holy smokes. Now, if he would have been doing that and he would have crashed his car and hurt himself, you know, all of that suffering that was brought into his life, that'd be on his own hand. You know, that would be because he chose it. Now, on the other hand, though, say he was doing 105 miles an hour and he managed to hit somebody else, you know, maybe killed a kid or something like that, you know, all of that suffering would have been a result of his choice. You know, and that's what God gives us. He gives us the free will to choose. So sometimes suffering is by our own hands. Sometimes it's just because, you know, people have the ability to choose and they make poor choices. I know when I look back at my own life, I can see plenty of examples of this where I've made decisions, you know, selfish decisions that have hurt other people. And I'm sure you guys can think of some own instances in your own lives. Well, why doesn't God step in? Why doesn't God stop that? Especially when these choices affect other people. You know, if he's a loving God, why does he allow that? And I like and kind of agree with what Dagon said, and he pointed out, you know, if God were to take away our free will, basically we'd be running around as robots. We'd have no choice and we'd just be mindless. And Blake even took it a little bit further and he said, you know, what would be the point of life if that were the case? You know, and I tend to agree with that. But I want to move on to and kind of address the specific question that the guy asked in the original video. And he asked, you know, what type of God would create this worm that, you know, just bores into this child's eyeball and causes him to go blind? Now, this is a good question. This would be an example of something happening that isn't a result, apparently isn't a result of man's will or man choosing something, you know. And this is something that kind of hit home for me because, you know, my daughter, you've seen her before. She has to wear a patch over her one eye because she was kind of born with one of her eyes not working. She was pretty much blind in that one eye. So, you know, there have been times that I've asked God, you know, why did you allow this to happen? Why was she born this way? Especially when my daughter, you know, is out at a ball game and she's wearing a patch and kids are pointing her fingers and making fun of her, and she comes up to me and she's like, Daddy, you know, I wish this wasn't the case. I wish I didn't have to do this. And she's crying and everything like that. You know, that hits home. And that's just a small issue to what some of you guys are facing out there. But when I answered that guy, I answered him pretty much like a lot of you guys did. I know Clee kind of started out and he said, you know, basically, this is an issue of faith and this is an issue of trusting God. And let me kind of develop this thought or kind of take you through this and why Christians believe this. You know, Dagon pointed out Romans 8:28. That's a great verse. And basically that verse says, you know, that we believe that God can use all things for our good. Bad things, you know, he can still use them for our good, for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purposes. And I've seen this in my own life. You know, the worst things that I've gone through, you know, growing up poor, growing up with an alcoholic father. I almost killed a kid when I hit him. It was an Amish kid in a buggy. I hit the buggy, almost killed him. My wife cheated on me. My first wife cheated on me with one of my good friends, and I ended up losing her and losing all my friends, and I was left with nothing. But when I look back at all those times, I can see God's hand in all of those things, and I can see how he used them to change me, to make me a more compassionate person, to, make me stronger in my faith. It's kind of like a football thing. When we start football and you're going through two-a-days and you're going through those, you tend to suffer through those times, when you're doing those double practices. But when it comes to game time, later on, you're like, oh man, now I'm ready. And when you find out that your stamina's increased, your strength's increased, you can look back at those times where you were suffering, in the heat of the day, doing those two-a-days, and you can look back though and see the purpose behind it. But while you're going through those things, it's hard to see that, and that's where that faith that Clee was talking about comes in. I know Soldier shared something very personal. He said when he was growing up, when he was a small kid, his father passed away, but looking back, he said, that was probably one of the key reasons to him becoming a Christian and to him being the type of person that he is, basically a weirdo / punk, only kidding. But, seriously, God is able to take the horrible and turn it into something else, to something beautiful, for those who allow him to do it. I've heard the testimony of a guy born without any limbs. I couldn't imagine being born that way, but he was born without any arms, without any legs, and I've seen this guy be able to reach people for Christ that I wouldn't be able to reach. There's something special about this guy because he's allowed God to put back the pieces. I've seen a woman who was aborted and somehow she managed to live through that abortion. Now she's a champion for life. FIFA had a great point. He pointed out, we are very limited. We just see the here and now. We just see a small piece of the picture. But God, he's not limited by time. He's not limited by, our physical limitations. He sees everything. He sees the big picture. What can God bring about through this kid possibly losing his sight? I don't know. But what if this is something that God uses to bring him to a Christian hospital and he meets somebody that tells him about Christ and it changes his life and he spends eternity in a place where there is no suffering? Could he look back on it and say, man, I didn't want to lose my eyesight, but I'm glad this happened because my life is now different. My life is now changed. Ocho pointed out that this life is very short compared to eternity. Now, I want to finish this video, pointing out something that somebody else sent me in a direct message. And he said, when we see suffering as a Christian, our responsibility is to reach out to people that are going through things. So by talking about suffering, I don't want to minimize it. I don't want to minimize what you're dealing with because some of you guys, like I said, are probably dealing with some heavy things, but I do want to help you out. So if you ever want to talk about anything, if you want to share it, I'd gladly pray for you. I'd gladly just listen to you. Even if you're not a Christian or anything like that, man, if there's anything I could do, if there's anything anybody else can do, leave a message for us and we'll try to help you as best as we can. Like I said, I just really don't want to minimize this, but I promise you that if you trust God with it and if you give this to him, I know he can turn it around and use it for your good. But those are my thoughts regarding suffering. Let me know if you have any ideas for a future video topic. I'd love to hear those thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Sakred. But guys, as always, take care and God bless.